Right, hello everyone, and welcome to tonight's Product Tank. Thank you so much for joining us. If you'd like to tweet tonight, please use the hashtag ProductTank. So, just a bit of background for those who haven't joined before. So, 8 years ago, Product Tank started in the basement of a London pub, and we're now in over 200 cities with over 200,000 regular attendees. At London, we have a couple more events this year. So we have one in July, one in September, October, and November. So please check back in for those. Tonight, big thanks to our sponsor, Mind the Product. Just a bit of background for those of you who don't know about Mind the Product. So it's the world's largest product community, and they've recently launched a website for a much better user experience and kind of to really grow that product community. So you can join that at mindtheproduct.com/join. There are blogs, there are newsletters, and there's also a really active Slack channel. So just a bit of an overview about tonight's agenda and timings. So at 7:30 we have the introduction, that's now. First talk in about 10 minutes, second talk at 8, third talk at 8:20, and then we're going to have time for a Q&A. With the Q&A, we really want to hear your questions for our speakers. So to submit a question, log into YouTube, click Show Chat, and then you can post your question down at the bottom. Now, to hand over for our curator for tonight's event, Andrew Kwan, Head of Product at LittlePay.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Andrew Kwan, Head of Product at LittlePay, a payment services provider specializing in the public transit industry. I'd like to first say a huge thank you to the Product Tank team for allowing me to help curate this event, and a huge thank you to the audience for joining us this evening at Virtual Product Tank Building Product Strategy. So just a quick introduction of myself, and then we'll go into the speakers. As a head of product for a company in the business of processing payments on transit, I found it very difficult in the last few months. Faced with many questions about how to ensure a sustainable and growing business, strategic initiatives, things that may or may not start, big bets in a roadmap, should we pursue them, should we not? And how do we realize the product strategy now in a remote first world? So when faced with many of these challenges, I think it's quite useful to keep in touch with the Product Tank community and see how other product people are tackling product decisions. So I hope today's session will inspire all of you to do the same. When curating this talk, I wanted to get a variety of opinions across various industries and company sizes. So I'm glad to say that we've got 3 lovely speakers to walk you through their thoughts. We have Pavan Budev, product designer from And Digital, Susanna Lopez, director of product at Onfido, and Joe Rinaldi Johnson, chief product officer at Zava. And first up, our first speaker, Pavan. He will cover what a product vision is, how it informs your strategy, and the different frameworks for creating a great product vision, and what to do when things don't go to plan. So over to Pavan.
Awesome. Thanks, Andrew. Hi, everyone. So as Andrew said, I'm Pavan. Thanks, everyone, so much for joining. I'm super, super excited to be here talking to all of you. I'm really honored to have this opportunity. Before we dive in, I just wanted to tell you a bit about me. I'm a product designer at a digital transformation agency called And Digital. So under that role, I do lots of different things, a bit of product management, a bit of user research, a bit of visual design work, that sort of thing. Over the next 20 minutes, I want to talk to you about something I'm really passionate about, product vision, and I'm going to approach it with a bit of a design lens. So here's what I'm going to be talking about. So we'll jump right in. What is a product vision? Now, I'm sure we all know what a vision is, but I just want to run through it quickly so we're all on the same page. The product vision is a statement or a slogan that describes the ultimate reason for creating your product. It's something high level and a prerequisite to strategy. So once you've got the vision nailed, you can work out the details, the strategy, and all the tactics you need to execute that strategy. It's really important to note the vision shouldn't be the only thing that feeds into the strategy. You should have considerations about, the business, the market, other competitors, user research, testing, all that sort of stuff needs to feed in. But sticking with the product vision for a second, one way I really like to think about it comes from Roman Pichler's book called Strategize. He says, vision describes the positive change that the product should bring about. I really love this way about thinking. I really love this way of thinking about products. Because of your product, how will the world be different? This way of thinking about product kind of frames it as a process. Ryan Singer of Basecamp has a really good article on this. If you haven't seen it, I'll have a link to it in these slides. I'll tell you about that at the end. But that article's called Products Are Functions, and he kind of looks how products can act as functions. A really important thing to take from this is that the goal of whatever you're building isn't just to finish what you're building. So if you're making an app, the goal isn't to build the app. The goal instead should be the outcome of building that app. So this is one of the properties of a vision, pointing out the positive delta, that kind of positive change that your product will help create. A second property of a great vision is that it acts like the product's true north. So as a product manager, my role is to take my team on a journey, and the vision points out the destination of that journey. By having that clear end goal in mind throughout, we always have something to aim towards. A good way to get buy-in is by making your vision really concise. By keeping it short, it means it's memorable, and it means your team can always come back to it a lot. It just reduces friction. It means that your team's not scared of referring back to it. So I've got an example here of a vision statement for a fictional meal delivery company called Conscious Cook, which is a meal delivery service that provides ingredient boxes and recipe cards ordered from an app. It syncs with Apple Health and Google Fit. It doesn't have excess weight. It targets these people, and so on. Now, this tells us a lot about what Conscious Cook does. It's all really useful, really important stuff. It highlights, the value prop, the target audience, but it's not a punchy slogan. If I had to refer back to this anytime I wanted to think about the direction of the product, and I had to dig through Slack channels to find where it's pinned or dig through Google Drive to see where it's buried, I'd probably ultimately forget about it. So having a concise vision like this, Conscious Cook, help people eat healthy, is much better. I've exaggerated this example hugely, but hopefully you can see the point I'm making here. By keeping it concise, it makes it a mission. The vision becomes something your team can band around. Great, so we've got 1, positive change in the world, 2, true north for the team. I think the last great property of a product vision is you want it to be inspiring. It should motivate your team, it should resonate with them, and it should inspire them. The property we just talked about, a true north, that's kind of about the direction it should aim for. This is more than just the direction. It's about keeping it gripping, really motivating, so you can stick with it. So we've got these 3 properties of a great vision. True north to guide the team, positive change in the world, motivate, resonate, and inspire. We know what we're aiming for, but how do we get there? Well, of course, there's a canvas for that. Now, this is the product vision canvas by Roman Pichler. I'm sure lots of you will know this. If you haven't seen it, the way it works is this. You fill out these bottom 4 columns, and then once you've got those written out, you craft a vision statement, which goes at the top. Another method I've seen, this comes from the Product Roadmaps Relaunched book. You start with a value proposition template. So on the left here, you answer these questions about your target customer, your product, and the category. You combine that with your company's overall strategy, and you come up with a vision statement. But I'll be honest, I really dislike both of these strategies for coming up with a vision. And this is why, to me, they both feel like box ticking exercises. Now, this is something I'm guilty of. I'll tell you a story. Last year, I was on a product team and we were creating a developer portal, which meant developers could access APIs, sign up for developer keys, read documentation, that sort of thing. We used the product vision canvas to make a vision statement. This is the statement we came up with. We want to create a fully enabled API platform that allows the company to become a respected program partner. That statement and the canvas was just one of a bunch of artifacts we created because it was the way we were doing things. We were just making these artifacts. And in retrospect, it was sort of a pointless exercise. And this is why it was pointless. We knew what the product was. We had our product in mind from the start. We knew we were working on a developer portal. So making that vision statement had no genuine purpose. But looking back and reflecting on it, this wasn't our fault. And if you've done something similar like this, you've done box ticking exercises, no, it probably wasn't your fault either. The problem with these 2 methods is that they both rely on you knowing what the product is beforehand, right? It's part of the method. Here you put it in here you've got it here. And I think these methods just leave you with vision statements that more than anything are very, very safe. And maybe that's exactly what you need because every team is different. There's no one right way of doing something. But I think if a vision ends up describing an existing product, It's not going to take you anywhere new. So for us on that developer portal project, the vision we wrote worked great because it kept our team aligned. So if we look back at these 3 properties of a great vision, we managed to get this first one. It was a true north and it aligned our team. But we didn't get to these 2. So how do we craft a great vision statement that hits all 3 of these properties? So what I'm going to do for the rest of this talk is I'm going to talk you through 2 frameworks which I really like and I've used personally to accomplish hitting those 3 properties. They are hills and storytelling. So we'll start with hills. So hills comes from IBM. IBM have a design thinking framework for enterprises. It kind of makes problems more like an ongoing conversation. It's specifically for design problems. So I know that I haven't seen it talked about in a lot of places, and I'm sure lots of product people might not have seen it, but it's definitely something I recommend checking out if you haven't heard of it. The IBM design thinking framework. One of the artifacts from this framework is a hill. I think, and I'm here proposing, that a hill can replace a product vision statement. So we'll dive in. What is a hill? A hill is just a sentence like a product vision statement. It's just a sentence. But more than that, it's a statement of intent written as a meaningful user outcome. By focusing on that outcome, a hill empowers teams to explore breakthrough ideas without losing sight of the goal. All this means that a hill is focused on where we're going and not how we're going to get there. So if this sounds abstract, stay with me. I think it's best explained with an example. Here's an example of a hill or a statement of intent. This was made by John F. Kennedy in 1961. Kennedy vowed that America would land a person on the moon and return them safely back to Earth by the end of the decade. I mean, wow, just wow. What an incredible statement. What an incredible sentence. Imagine you're hearing that from the president in 1961. A month earlier, Yuri Gagarin had just returned from space. For the first time ever, after millennia of human beings existing on the Earth, a man had been to space and returned. And less than a month later, your president has vowed to do it again. And not just send him to space, but send the person to the moon. Remember, no one's ever landed a spacecraft on the moon before, let alone one with people on board. And get this, astronauts going to be returned safely back to Earth. And remember, in this whole speech, I've got a link to it at the bottom, JFK doesn't say anything about how they're going to do it. He just says it's going to happen. So this is a hill. We'll break it down into its component parts. So every hill has 3 parts, a who, a what, and a wow. So here the who is the person, the astronaut. The what is landing them on the moon. And the wow is returning them safely back to Earth. Now every hill needs a wow. It's something that takes it above and beyond. And adding that wow makes this such a monumentally more difficult task. Not only does the spacecraft need to be able to take off and reach the moon, it needs to land gently on the lunar surface, not crash land, and then the whole thing needs to be able to survive the extreme conditions of re-entry when it returns through Earth's atmosphere. It makes this task extraordinarily more difficult. But it's what gives this hill that special, that's something special. It's what makes people get goosebumps when they read this sentence. So we've got a sentence that states a desired outcome. It's clear, and it's also flexible. There's no predetermined solution, which allows the team to be innovative. So I've got a couple more examples of what hills are. These ones are more tech-focused. But as I read them out, I want all of you to see if you can identify the who, the what, and the wow in each of them. Every person in Nairobi can use affordable, high-speed internet in their own homes. A back-end developer who's never before used our company's APIs can use them to build and run an app in a maximum time of 30 minutes. I'll do one more, but this time we'll start with the traditional product vision statement. So this is for a meditation app. Our app lets users meditate any time of day with their personalized pocket guide. Now, this vision statement isn't bad, right? It tells us the core features of the product. It's a meditation app. It's on your phone. It's personalized to you, so it's not generic. You can get access to it at any time. That's great. But instead, here's a hill. Our users feel calmer in just 10 minutes a day. Hopefully, you can see how that's so much more, powerful. It's much more outcome-focused, and it's more inspiring. So quickly, I'll touch on how to write a hill. But if you've ever run any sort of ideation workshop, I'm sure this process will be familiar to you. Although, to be honest, the process has kind of changed recently, right? Because before you'd book a meeting room with a whiteboard, get a stack of Post-its and Sharpies, but now you just have to send around a Miro link. But anyway, you get up a whiteboard, you throw out who, what, and wow sections, and you throw out Post-its for each. With any ideation, it's best to have people of all disciplines in the room. So get as many people to buy in as you can, just get them for an hour. And again, with all ideation sessions, quantity is more important than quality, right? So you want to get all the bad ideas out so that you can get to the good ones. Once you've got this, you've got these building blocks, you kind of put them together, one from each column to come up with a draft hill, and keep mixing and matching till eventually you get a sentence which feels right. Remember, you can't retrospectively write hills for all the features in your product. So don't start with what you already have. Start with the problems you have and think about what change you want to see in the world. Hopefully it's clear to you how hills hit all three of these properties which we started with. Writing a hill gives you a true north which guides your team. It highlights a positive change which you want to see in the world, and it motivates, resonates, and inspires people. Let's talk quickly about another way of making great visions, which is storytelling. So storytelling is used everywhere. Everything we do in life is shaped as having a narrative. Our daily actions in life, the way we think about our relationships, even the identities we give ourselves, we always frame them as stories. And this is because intrinsically humans are storytelling creatures. This trait of human nature means we can take advantage of the properties of storytelling when we craft our vision statements. So while hills show us what the world could be like in our wildest dreams, in a positive way, what we can do is we can use storytelling to warn us of how the world could turn out to be in a negative way. Here's how. Every story has a really similar structure. It's called Freytag's pyramid. A story has an exposition where they kind of set the scene, a rising action, a climax, a falling action, and then a resolution or denouement. Now, every story follows this shape, and it's a structure which has been widely analyzed by lots of academics. I think it even goes back to Aristotle. But this familiarity and this, similar structure is actually a good thing. It's why we can relate to it and connect to stories on an intrinsic level. By framing the vision of a product as a story, we can hit all three of those properties. But the problem is, it's hard to write a great story, right? That's why storytellers are so widely sought after, and it's such a skill that people try and invest in. Here's my shortcut to doing it. Introduce conflict. Now, the conflict is the really interesting part of any story. Without conflict, you don't have a story. Life just happens as normal. Think about Harry Potter, but instead of having prophecies and curses and Lord Voldemort, it was just a bunch of magical kids who go to school. I mean, that sounds sweet, but that's not really a story. There's no drama there. Luckily, although writing great stories is hard, coming up with a piece of conflict is easy. This is especially true in product. You just have to go back to the problem you're trying to solve. Because after all, when we start decomposing everything into stories, which have a hero, a conflict, a resolution, we see that products are, quite similar. Products are about a user overcoming a challenge with the product as the solution to that challenge. So here I'm going to present to you my conflict template. This is similar to the Hills workshop before. So remember, Hills, we had a who, a what, and a wow. I think, again, we need a who the story is about, a what, which is the problem they need to overcome. And instead of a wow factor, this time we need an ow factor. We need something which, helps us tell a sad story about the state of the world, something which isn't positive. Once we've got that, we can flip it to form our vision statement. So I'll do an example. Remember, we were talking about the meditation app. So if we go back to it, storytelling vision is a shortcut to remember a story about the world. So if we go back to the Headspace, the meditation app example, a meditation app helps you solve the problem of feeling stressed and anxious with no quick way to calm down. So imagine you're at work, you really need to let off some steam, but because you're stuck at work, you can't go for a run, you can't vent to your partner. So this is the problem you're facing. If we flip that, we can frame a solution in an inspiring way. Feel calmer quickly and easily. The vision statement becomes a shortcut, which takes us back to the story we've told ourselves. Another example, imagine you've gone for a walk in the countryside and you've spent the whole day taking beautiful photos of everything you see, but then on your way home, you drop your phone in a puddle it becomes filled with water, you plug it in, you try putting it in a bag of rice, but nothing works. All your treasured memories are gone. All the photos you wanted to share with people have been lost. If we flip this around, don't lose your memories. We've got a vision which reminds us of that story. And then this can be a vision for, a product about backing up your photos, syncing them to the cloud. So hopefully you can see that storytelling-driven visions that kind of use a storytelling component, help align a team, frame a positive change in the world, and really motivate and inspire people. Cool. So just to end, we've talked a lot about visions and then Hills and Stories as framework. I want to go back to the title. I call this talk Visions 2020. When we had to pick a title, I kind of picked it as a pun on 2020 vision. But actually 2020 has turned out to be wildly different to what any of us could have predicted, right? Lots of our normal ways of living have drastically changed, and lots that we used to take for granted has disappeared. And I was thinking about this, and I think the thing which has disappeared, which is most striking, is a sense of certainty. For most of us, it's the first time in our lives when we don't know what's going to happen in the coming months. We don't know when we'll go back to work in an office, whether we'll be able to travel, what will happen to the economy. Some of us don't even know when we'll next see distant loved ones. Searching for certainty is one of the primary motives that determines everything we do in our lives. As humans, we always continuously grasp for answers until we reach an explanation. We always try and get closer to a state of cognitive closure. But clinging to certainty kind of leads to a fundamental anxiety, a constant questioning of where am I going? What should I be doing? If anything, 2020 has shown us that things are always going to change, and trying to grasp at certainty isn't ever going to be successful. So in terms of product vision, it's a sign that visions shouldn't be static and fixed. We should always have the flexibility to change them. But I think, that probably applies to life too. We should always have a bit of flexibility and be ready for change. Anyway, that's all from me. Thank you so much for listening and joining this evening. I really hope you got something out of this. I'm on Twitter, and if you want to chat or ask any questions about it, I'll be on there, and also I'll be posting the slides there. So I've got some further reading and resources for all the stuff I talked about. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you for your presentation, Pavan.
Thanks, Andrew.
Just a couple of things stood out for me. So earlier on in my career in product, I was given this huge tip to, if there's one skill you want to master at any level, it's just the ability to empathize with your users, your stakeholders, and the people around you. So stating a product vision that's more than just a true north, and it's more emotional around motivating, resonating and inspiring people is something I hugely agree with. So that's a huge tip. And the Hills framework, I didn't really think about the owl factor. I have many examples of owls in the company, so I'm not too sure if that's a good thing, because there's more owls than wows, but that's okay. We'll see how we go next time we have those presentations in our teams. Okay, so on to our next speaker, The State of Product by Susana Lopez. So Susana is a director of product at Onfido. Susana will deep dive into bottom-up strategy methods, focusing on the state of product as a way to empower PMs and teams to think strategically and make recommendations and requests to C-level staff. So over to you, Susana.
So when I started at Onfido about 3 years ago, I could tell you what we were building for the next 2 weeks, more or less. And that was a little bit unsettling. It gave us a lot of flexibility, but we didn't have a clear direction of travel or a clear plan for more than 2 weeks. So we started using a framework that I believe will be familiar with a lot of you, called RICE. This was popularized by Intercom, and it tries to quantify a score for each one of your initiatives. So essentially, we all got in a room, all of our PMs, and essentially calculated the reach, the impact, the confidence, and gave a score for each one of our initiatives in a huge spreadsheet, and used that to plan our next 3 months with all of our priorities competing against all of them. And that got us a little bit further. So we were able to see at least 3 months into the future, but it still felt like we were completely disjointed in the way that we were prioritizing, and the direction of travel was still not very clear. So then someone joined our team Kevin joined as our Chief Product Officer, and he started looking at this and talking to us about strategy and talking to us about being more deliberate in the way we were building product. And he introduced some tools which I'm going to share with you today, so that I hope you can do the same with them. And that got us to having a visibility of a direction of travel on more of a year time frame. And before I go into the details of how we did that and the tools we use today, I just want to acknowledge that this technique of the state of product is just one way of doing strategy, and it's a bottom-up strategy tool. Another way to do it is actually going top-down. So instead of getting your PMs to do it, you start from the top. And the best way that I've seen this exemplified in a very detailed way that's easy to follow was by Melissa Perri in Escaping the Build Trap. So she outlines this strategy deployment levels framework, which very clearly articulates in the company who is responsible for what level of strategic definition. So you have here an example where the CEO is responsible for what do we want to be in next 5 to 10 years. So that's the vision, which we just talked about. Then you have all of the senior leadership team talking about, so if we're here now and we want to get there, what is in the way between where we are now and where we want to travel. And what is really great about this is that it's not only product people talking about this, you also have your sales leadership, your marketing leadership, and everyone is aligned. And so when you choose those challenges, then you also not only deploy a product strategy, but you deploy a sales strategy, a go-to-market strategy, and everything is super aligned. And then it cascades really well into product leadership, then choosing problems to solve, and then eventually your team's choosing ways to solve those problems. And this is fantastic, but it requires a huge amount of buy-in, right? You need every single layer to be aligned. And I really recommend you read this book. I'll show you the cover at the end. And here are some examples of what this might look like with exactly the example that she covers in the book, where you go from a strategic intent that's about revenue, and then you actually go, okay, how do we double that revenue? And then the teams go into actually looking at the options. And at this point, you could go into a opportunity solution trees like Teresa Torres. So really great stuff. And I think it's what we all aspire to get to, this like product-led organization. But what can you do if that's not how your company is set up today, right? Like what can you do as an individual contributor, and what can you do as a product leader that wants to pitch this type of way of working? And so one way you could do it is actually, instead of going top down, you go bottom up. And so that's what we're going to be covering today, is one way of doing bottom-up strategy called the state of product, which was introduced by Kevin at Untitled. All right, so the state of product, what are the key ingredients of a state of product? One, it has a deadline. So we all know in product management, it's very easy to get caught up in all the fires that we face every day. And so if you don't have a deadline to do something by, it's really easy to just go like, yeah, I'll do the strategy later, next quarter. So set a deadline and stick to it. And the reason why we need to stick to it is because you're going to invite C-level attendees to this meeting. And one, it's really hard to book them, so you need to set this in advance. And then once the day comes, like you can't move it anymore because it'll be really hard to find another slot where you can actually talk to them about this. And then finally, it's a framework to help you zoom out. We're so caught up in like, what color should the button be? Where does this go? Is this more important than this? What is this bug priority? This framework helps you actually go out of your comfort zone of operating and delivering your product, and actually think about where it fits in the world and how your users think about it more generically. So what is it? So it's a tool to communicate strategy for the coming year. It's a formal presentation. At the end, you're going to make a request. You're going to request for more resources, or you're actually going to make a recommendation that less resources be assigned to something because you think that's not going to be a winning strategy. It's led by product managers. In our company, originally we had every single product manager do one, and now we actually group them by revenue generating products, which have multiple product managers working on it. So you might want to organize this differently in your company. In terms of cadence, we used to do it every 6 months. Now we do it every year. And it really is a fantastic way to get individual product managers that don't necessarily get exposure to strategy and strategic thinking to get in that mindset and to make those contributions. So who do you invite? All of the C's. You want to have representation from your whole business. And if you don't have C's, go down to heads of or directors. Essentially, you want the most experienced and most senior person in each area of the business to be in the room and to hear and buy into your strategy. All right, so what do we cover in the state of product? We have all of these sections. The first two are really bread and butter stuff. You should be able to define your product. You should be able to put some key metrics on the table. Then you actually zoom out and look at what the market looks beyond your product. And then you get into the hard stuff. You start looking at strategy. And then you go, okay, now that I have a strategy, what does that mean for my roadmap? What kind of resources do I need? And how do those resources affect my ability to execute faster or slower? And you finalize with execution plan, risks, and unknowns. So let's get into it. So for the product definition, you should all be able to do this for your respective products. Make sure you talk about the value proposition. What does it do? Why do people care? You might use a value proposition canvas or something, some artifact like this, demos, etc. This section should be easy peasy. Next up, you want to start talking about metrics. How is this product performing so far? And really importantly, you want to link this to key goals that the company has. And typically, the strategic intents that a company would have would be around either increasing revenue, protecting revenue, avoiding costs, or reducing costs, or maybe you have something around margins. It's really important that even the most junior product manager is able to link their product to these overarching metrics. I originally thought that this was someone else's job, like, oh, I don't look after revenue, that's finance. No. Your product contributes to the bottom line. You should be able to get these numbers and articulate them and have a sense for what the right level of progression over the years has been and tell a compelling story of where you are right now. If your product does not directly contribute to revenue, maybe there's some proxy metrics you can use, like retention or adoption. You could look at pirate metrics. Essentially put down what is the key metric and how are you performing against it. Now, let's get on to product market analysis. So we've only been talking about your product so far. Now you want to take a step back and understand, where does this product fit in the world, right? So you've got your little product. What is adjacent to it? So here we have an example from the grocery value chain. So essentially, if you were a logistics company, what comes before logistics? What comes after logistics? What is the chain of value until the user actually buys their thing in the supermarket? So that could be a thing that you can think about when you're trying to map out the ecosystem of this product. You could look at the different components, or you could look at the user journey, like, okay, they're using my product. What product are they just using just before? And what product are they using just after? There might be essentially an ecosystem of products that your types of users use. Then list out, like, who are the key suppliers? Who are the key partners? What are the major barriers to someone entering your market? Like, do they need a particular certification or an accreditation? And then take a moment to go, like, okay, what kind of trends have I seen in the last 6 months? Like, has the market changed significantly in one way or another? So until now, we're only talking about descriptive things, right? Just stating facts of your product and your market. Now we're moving on to actually analyzing these and starting to think about recommendations. So now we're going to go into the product strategy section. So here we have 3 tools that might be useful to you when you're thinking about strategy. The first one is called strategic network analysis. Then we're going to go into strengths, opportunities, and threats, and then a typical competitive assessment. And all of this is going to roll out into you actually defining some themes, some consequences. What am I going to do about all this? All right, so let's get into strategic network analysis. So here you want to look at the types of things that you want to maximize to make it really hard for competitors to enter your market, and the types of things you want to try and minimize to stop your users from leaving you. And this is very important, and it's a way of looking at things from the point of view of building products with data, which essentially all of us should be doing by now, in that data is probably your biggest asset. So things to maximize: network effects. So what is the value of your service? And does it change with more people using your service? right? So let's look at an example. If I have a car, the value of a car to me is just the value of a car. It doesn't really matter how many other people have cars. That is finite. There is no network effect for me. In fact, if more people have cars, the value of my car might go down because it makes it harder for me to get on the road because there's so much traffic. However, if I have a fax machine or a telephone, the value of that product increases with the number of people that have those same products because I can communicate with them. So when you have a product with a very strong network effect, it makes it really hard for a competitor to enter your market, because for them to have the same value as you, they need to have a network of users as big as yours. So take a moment to think about, does my product have network effects? And if it doesn't, how do I introduce more network effects to make it harder for someone else to enter my market? The second one is around learning effects. Does the usage of your product generate hard to obtain learning? And learning could be hard to obtain data. Learning could be hard to obtain usage patterns that then allow you to create new products. By now, you should definitely have booby-trapped your product with all sorts of analytics trackers. And so any product that you have will generate data. And the thing is to try and assess how hard is that to get, and does that create a barrier to entry to your competitors? So you want to maximize learning effects. Now let's look at things that you want to try and minimize. So multi-homing. Does your user regularly use alternatives to your service? So there, a really great example is an Uber driver. They typically do a lot of multi-homing. So not only are they on Uber, they're also on Lyft. And that is because they're trying to maximize the usage of their time and maximize their return. And so Uber has a big problem with multi-homing, because the more people use multiple car riding apps, the less drivers they will have, and then that minimizes the value for their end users. So Uber does a lot of stuff to make sure that their drivers stay only within Uber, so that it keeps that network really powerful. So think about these types of effects in your product and try to come up with tactics to minimize this. And then the last one is disintermediation. So this is a typical problem when you're maybe like a TaskRabbit or some sort of intermediary that helps people connect to another service, and then you take a cut. So maybe like a cat sitting service where you introduce people who have cats with people who want to cat sit. And then the moment I meet the cat sitter, I'm going to go like, hey, can I have your WhatsApp? And then suddenly the next time I want to buy this person's time, I can just go through WhatsApp directly, and I don't need to pay that cut. So disintermediation is a huge, huge threat to profitability for these types of businesses. And you want to think about whether this is happening in your business and what you can do to reduce this from happening. What kind of value, what kind of extra stuff can you do for these users so that it's really, really valuable and they don't want to leave? And so we've got the things we want to maximize, network and learning. We will have the things we want to minimize, multi-homing and disintermediation. And now something else to keep in mind is, what is the value of what I have right now, and is it valuable to someone else, to another market? And these are bridging opportunities. So one great example of this is Google has a lot of data about what people are searching for, and that is hard to get, so loads of learning effects. And they use that data to then bridge into the advertising market, because the advertisers really wanted to know what people were searching for. And Uber, for example, has a lot of drivers, and they use this to then bridge to the delivery of food market. So think about, what do you have that other people don't have, and how can you bridge into another market that was previously unconnected to yours, that can provide new novel value? So that's the network, strategic network analysis. You build this little scorecard, and you're trying to figure out what would be some tactics to maximize the things that are good, minimize the things that are bad, and then look at bridging opportunities. So let's talk about the second part in product strategy. So strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So anyone that comes from a business background will probably be very familiar with this. I come from an engineering background, so this is a little bit more novel. So here you want to look at the things that are intrinsic to your company that are good and bad. So you look at, let's list out what are our strengths. What are we really, really good at? And then you want to list out what are the weaknesses of your company. And then underneath, you list out what are the things that are external to us that are either positive or negative that might influence how successful we're going to be. And then you start looking at, okay, you stack rank them. You go like, okay, which one is our biggest opportunity and which one is our biggest threat? And then you try and come up with innovative ways to combine these. So this kind of turns into a matrix of like, okay, how can I use my strengths to maximize my opportunities? And how can I use my strengths to minimize my threats? And so by trying to combine these two things, you essentially come up with sometimes pretty crazy ideas that don't make any sense, but often you find some really good ideas of applying some of your strengths, maybe your proprietary tech, with an opportunity that might be verticalization. So when you were plotting out your market ecosystem, you might have realized, oh, actually, I want to own more of this stack. And you can apply your proprietary tech to verticalization to maximize that opportunity. And then the last part of product strategy is about taking a moment to do competitive assessment. And depending on what your company looks like, you might have product marketeers that are able to help you with this, but you might just have to do this yourself. So here you should look at how to compare your product to your competitors and understand where are areas of pressure that you can apply and continue to differentiate, and what are areas where you're being threatened, where your competitor is really outpacing you. Maybe it's a technical capability, maybe it's something they prioritized that you didn't for a very long time. And now you have this analysis and you start going like, okay, well, there seems to be this bridging opportunity. There seems to be this threat that I need to defend against. There seems to be this other opportunity that I can take advantage of. And you should start to bubble up what are some themes that will start to create your strategy. And here you want to list out some key themes, and don't go crazy. Choose 2 or 3. You want to stay really focused to try and maximize those opportunities and make it really hard for new entrants to enter and encroach on your market. And then you do what product managers do. You turn your themes into roadmaps. And here I've listed out features, but you could put capabilities or outcomes, or you could put metrics. This is just illustrative to show that you want to show something that's fairly specific for the short term, and then more into the future, it kind of fades into the unknown, but you still have the direction of travel, and you still have those 2 or 3 themes that define your strategy that are based in all of your analysis. And then you go, okay, audience of C-level people, here's what I'm proposing. In terms of execution, this is what I see as the biggest risks, and a lot of it will have come out in the wash from your analysis. Oh, okay, oh my God, what happens if, I don't know, Apple decides to take over this market? What are we gonna do? And then how do we mitigate against that particular risk? And then you actually go into your ask. You go, all right, if you believe in this strategy, which by now they should be very excited about and they should be really bought into, this is what I recommend we do from a resourcing point of view. So here what I have is an example of something I've done in the past where I actually recommended we kill or significantly downsize one of our teams because it was very easy for competitors to get in. It was very low margins in the long term. So my recommendation was, let's save some money. Let's go and focus somewhere else that has a brighter future. And the key thing that you want to take here is let's make it crystal clear to the C-level audience that these are the consequences of doing nothing. These are the consequences of funding this, and these are the consequences of not funding this, right? You want to show in your roadmap, okay, if you fund us in this way, this is how fast we can execute against this strategy. And if you don't, this is what will happen instead. So they understand how they can apply their cash into maximizing those opportunities in the long term. So that's what a state of product looks like. I just want to finalize in making you think a little bit of why this is important right now. This is important right now because your market ecosystem has changed so much. A lot of companies are going bust. Maybe you should consider buying them, or a lot of behaviors have changed. this is the moment where you need to be reassessing your strategy. And if you don't have already a top-down way of doing that, you as an individual contributor and you as a product leader can start to create the foundations to make this happen. And you don't need to do the whole state of product thing. You could start small. You could take a moment for this week to look at the product market analysis and try to understand who are the other players in the industry. Or you could try to do the strategic network analysis and look at your learnings, looking at your network effects, and seeing what are the types of capabilities that you could put in place to make it harder for your competitors to get in. Or you could do this the SWOT, or you could do the competitive assessment. Pick one or two to actually start zooming out of your everyday chaos and think more strategically and more long term. I'm going to close out with some further reading. I talked about Escaping the Build Trap by Melissa Perri. Really recommend this book for top-down strategy and like a really compelling product-built and product-led company. And the strategic network analysis comes from a book called Competing in the Age of AI. Really recommend you read their chapter on strategy. It's got some great stuff in there and much more examples than I was able to cover today. If you would like the slides, they're available on my website, or just tweet at me. So that is it for me, guys. I hope that was helpful.
Great work. Thank you, Susanna. I used to work in management consulting, so before product, so I'm a huge fan of strategy development in general, so both top down and bottom up. A couple of takeaways just want to mention before getting onto our third speaker, Joe. Product strategy, yeah, I think it should be across all product levels. So it's a great way to get buy-in from your executives, trust and empathy, and focusing on the ask and like more resources, bandwidth to run your experiments, or even like corporate investment in one of your struggling competitors maybe during this time. It's huge value in that. And the second thing I learned, zooming out. Yeah, so I think we often forget about the why and the broader direction of travel. We're always thinking about, shipping the next feature out, velocity, efficiency, metrics, all these different things. But if you can zoom out and think about the market context, you can champion to make changes that you may have missed if you didn't look at that because you were so focused on delivery. So thank you, Susanna, for those tips.
Nice.
Okay, finally, our third speaker, Joe Rinaldi Johnson. So healthcare regulations aren't designed for a digital era, and the regulatory landscape shifts slowly until there's a cataclysmic change and the landscape is completely reformed. Joe will be talking about building product strategy when sector foundations are in flux and how to respond to that change. So over to you, Joe. I think you're on mute. There we go. No, still on mute.
That working?
Yes, there we go. Thank you.
There we go. Third time lucky. So my name's Joe. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Zava. Been really excited to speak to you all today. I've been looking forward to this event almost as much as I've been looking forward to getting a haircut. I've been working in healthcare for around 10 years as an advisor to the NHS, as a Chief Marketing Officer, as a Product Manager, and as a Chief Product Officer. And I'm particularly honored to speak to you all today, as ProductTank played a really important role in my transition from the world of advisory into the world of product. I remember vividly how inspiring it was to sit in a room with a bunch of people sharing their knowledge and skills and experiencing what I can only really describe as my first product group therapy session with beers. If you've been to one of the product tanks in person, you'll know what I'm talking about. If you haven't come across Zava before, we're an online service that allows roughly 1 million people a year to get a lab test, get treatment, or speak to a doctor across the UK, Ireland, Germany, France, and our partners. Now, working in this field is not particularly straightforward. Regulatory, in my view, is one of the most challenging aspects of it. And it's something that's not really discussed that often in a lot of the sort of standard product management materials. I've made my fair share of mistakes. I've launched products that have bombed, and I've upset regulators at various points in time. So today, I'd love to share some of the things that I've learned on that journey. Let's start with the challenges. There are an incredible number of problems to work on in the healthcare space. These headlines on the left point to huge access problems that many people face, demographic issues such as aging populations and fewer working age people, demographic issues, lifestyle issues, eating, drinking, smoking too much, exercising too little. And we're running the whole thing on a credit card. And that was before COVID hit. So at a societal level, we really need to make healthcare better, and we need to do it fast. Now, in tech startup land, we often like to think about moving fast and breaking things. This is Facebook's original unofficial cultural mantra. This really does not work in healthcare. In fact, in healthcare, the dominant mindset is to move slowly and don't kill people. I don't know who said this first, so I can't credit them, but I absolutely love it. I think it sums things up perfectly. This mindset dominates for very good reasons. Healthcare is really dangerous. A lot of people who interact with it are quite vulnerable, and a percentage of people are actually harmed when they interact with the system. Thinking of things like hospital-acquired infections, never events, prescribing and dispensing mistakes. So there's this huge tension between the size of the challenge in society and the speed with which we can tackle it. Partly because of this mindset, a lot of regulatory barriers are put in the way of those trying to innovate. I'll talk about one of the most extreme contrasts I've experienced. This is a copy of our most recent report from the Care Quality Commission. They're the UK regulator of healthcare organisations. They say Zava is safe, effective, caring, responsive, and well-led. These are not easy inspections to pass. They arrive unannounced, they can see everything, they can speak to anyone about anything. Yes, if you're a junior engineer or you've just joined, they can talk to you and see your emails if they want to. So getting to good on all 5 ratings is a source of immense pride. On the right-hand side is an article from a time in 2016 when the Bundestag, that's the German parliament, passed a law specifically designed to attempt to stop patients from using our service. Now, we were called Dr. Ed back then. Now, the effect of this law was to prevent German pharmacists from being able to dispense medication that our doctors have prescribed. Obviously, that's a massive problem given how important medication prescriptions are to good healthcare. So you have this sort of patchwork that builds up because of these changes. There's EU-level regs, country-level, state-level. They cover different layers: doctors, medications, advertising, pharmacists, devices. We're going to have a bunch of new ones coming along with Brexit that none of us quite know how to navigate at this stage. And before I go on, I want to make one thing clear. I'm not some Wild West, no rules, do whatever it takes to move the metric product guy. I'm a huge advocate of good regulation. Good laws make everything clearer and more straightforward and create a level playing field. But a lot of the laws are really old. They're designed for a pre-digital era. They're designed actually in an era when no one had considered that a doctor might one day not actually be physically in the presence of a patient. And so this dynamic creates a huge amount of ambiguity. It creates a huge amount of complexity. And faced with this, I've seen teams really get bogged down in this patchwork of details. And one way I think we can help teams to move forward through the complexity and ambiguity is with product strategy. Now, my view on what product strategy is sort of stolen and mashed up from a number of far more experienced and smarter product people. I'd really recommend you reading Shreyas Doshi, Gibson Biddle, Marty Kagan for their works on strategy. I'll send some links out later on. But to sort of put it together, in my view, product strategy is about arming teams with objectives and context to increase their chances of building valuable, usable, feasible, defensible products. It's a connection point between your product vision and your OKRs. Great strategy provides clarity and direction to teams beyond that rhythm of quarterly OKRs, whilst allowing autonomy to figure out the best solution. With a really clear strategy, any team member can walk the things they're working on all the way up to the product vision, connecting the day-to-day to the long-term. But there's one thing that underpins development and execution of great strategy, and that's collaboration. I did a really fun exercise recently I'd really recommend. I did a little meta review of past sort of end of initiative retros. And in these retros, I noticed 2 types of collaboration that were really important. First is between legal and product, and the second is between product and doctors. When we hadn't set up the right collaborations, teams were slow to identify regulatory challenges and slow to respond to them. When they were set up well, they sensed potential obstacles early, mitigated them and executed fast. Setting up these collaborations well is not just about having lawyers and doctors in your organization. How you work together really matters too. And I want to draw a few contrasts here. It's better to start together so everyone has the shared context rather than leaving it to the end. The mindset of gathering requirements from experts that I've spotted will leave you with a list of 100 ways that things are impossible. So you need to get people in a room together and do these co-design practices that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. Sign-off processes are a bit of a warning flag that your teams are set up to move slowly. Collaboration needs to be continuous. If your teams are competing for shared resource, you'll likely be wasting time and moving slowly. These topics often need time and space. Mindset matters too. I really encourage teams to be curious about what's possible. Taking rules and constraints as this is the way really impedes progress. And homework really matters as well. It's really worthwhile investing a few hours of your time, if you're a PM, to dive into the details with doctors and lawyers so you can empathize, you can understand, and you can communicate effectively. So, assuming you've got your collaboration set up for success, you need to focus on understanding deeply your customer's context so you can make some long-term bets on how you will create value for them in a defensible way. I borrowed this language of bets from John Cutler. He's the product evangelist at Amplitude, because everything we do in product has a strong chance of failure. It's important we embrace the uncertainty and keep discussing confidence in our bets as we develop and work on our strategy. One thing I'm pretty confident about is this: if you're not focusing on creating customer value, your product strategy is pretty likely to fail. Sure, it's possible to win on growth hacking and distribution, but it's a pretty risky approach to take in a world where startups can spin up a competing product in a short space of time. And I learned some of these lessons the hard way. I had a really humbling moment when a chunk of my product strategy failed. And when I looked into the root cause of this, it's as a result of betting part of the strategy on a high growth market segment without really having a good understanding of what problems customers had and ways in which we may be able to leverage our strengths to solve them in that area in a defensible way. Conversely, we got it more right, or more likely to be right, when the bets we placed were rooted in a clear understanding of customers' context. How do you do this? I'm sure many of you have lots of tools for doing this. It's about getting out of the building, talking to people, mining your data for insights, running experiments. I recommend a mixture of continuous discovery and some bigger, more fundamental pieces of strategic customer research. One of the most impactful pieces of research we did was a multiple-month study in Germany and the UK using a methodology called outcome-driven innovation developed by Anthony Ulrich. It's well worth a read. And what we found was that in most people's minds, the ideal healthcare process looks a bit like this. I have some symptoms, some magical things happen, I get back to normal as quickly as possible, and I get on with doing things that I actually care about, like Twitter and Netflix and raising children and maybe ProductTank. In a nutshell, people don't want to do healthcare. They don't actually want to use my product. Healthcare is a negative thing. Obviously, this has some pretty major ramifications for strategy, particularly around things like engagement. It's not a fun activity. Now, whilst people want a kind of magic, make me better experience, unfortunately, what they actually experience is a series of steps in between. They go to Google, they read a few articles, they read the article that says they probably have cancer and some really rare disease that exactly matches the symptoms, they're going to die in an hour. They filter through that and, eventually figure out they need to maybe see a doctor about this. They battle past receptionists to get appointments. After getting an appointment, they have to wait, they have to sit in a doctor's surgery around a lot of other sick people. People don't like this. They think they can pick up other infections. Once they've got their medication or treatment plan, they've got to usually go and collect it. They've got to take it, and then they monitor it until they get back to normal. And what came up in this research time and time again as being important and pretty low satisfaction for people was saving time and hassle. Now, in the context of healthcare, it's really important because when things take time or a hassle to complete, it magnifies the pain and discomfort. And so, this is on the back of this research, we figured out if we can keep pushing the boundaries of fast and easy, we create value for our customers. It became one of the main insights driving our strategic themes. Now, we had the intent to make things fast and easy, but as I highlighted from the Bundestag example earlier on, a number of aspects of legislation appeared to make this pretty challenging and from a feasibility perspective, particularly in Germany. One of the things that I found really helped and I would recommend to people in similar situations is scanning. Now, our co-founder and CEO, David Meinert, is a German lawyer by background, so the process of scanning the regulatory environment came pretty naturally to us. We were regularly preparing and discussing updates on the legal situation. It's actually really straightforward to do. I think this is one of the surprising things. It's really straightforward to get insights about the regulatory environment because we live in democracies and a lot of these changes are extensively written about in the press. It takes a bit of time to do it. You need a bit of access to some lawyers so you understand it properly, and you need to have some sort of reminder or cadence to actually remember to do it. But these kind of regulatory openings, they're really spottable and you can see them coming from some way off. A few questions that I would recommend considering asking yourself. If this regulation weren't here, what might we enable our customers to do? And does this fit with our strategy themes? This question is important because you need to connect regulatory opportunities back to customer value. Just because something is changing doesn't mean it's a good fit. And we ended up turning down a range of different emerging opportunities that sounded great initially, but actually we couldn't tie them back to a real customer problem and a strategy theme. Second question, what's the likelihood that this law or regulation changes in the next X months? This is important because you need to avoid thinking about regulatory change as a binary thing, like will it change or won't it change? We were faced with a situation where we knew the law would change and we placed some pretty big bets on it, but we got the date wrong by about 12 months. So I think if I was to do this again, keep the conversation on percentage likelihood and have that discussion as that likelihood changes over time. Third question, how might we enable this customer behavior sooner in a safe, ethical, compliant way? This last question prompts teams to think about creative ways to deliver the customer value that they might not initially have thought of. In the case of the Bundestag and the Dr. Ed ban in 2016, we discovered a way to continue for customers to obtain their prescriptions via a mail order pharmacy in another country. It was slow, it wasn't the best experience, but it actually worked. A couple of years ago, this scanning started to detect some rumblings, and one of our product teams who'd set up a frankly beautiful collaborative setup between product, doctors, and legal were estimating that certain laws were imminently changing. Considering that some people in Germany had attempted to ban us, it was pretty stunning to see this huge sea change in our regulatory environment. Not only was the Dr. Ed law overturned, remote treatment via video was legalized for the first time. We actually started to get invited to join pilot studies and programs by German states. The health minister started talking about us on TV as a key innovator. And there was even talk about changing funding rules. So the state would pay us to provide services to the German population en masse. This is like a 360-degree turn here. And we spotted a good chunk of it. Okay, the timings were out a little bit, but we spotted it. Now, watching this situation emerge, our view of the size of the opportunities and the window of time available to us changed our calculation. And going through this experience made me realize that at a product strategy level, you need to continuously increase and decrease the strengths of your bets based on your analysis of what's going on in the environment. So when the prohibitive laws were passed, we had the strategic intent to make things fast and easy, but at the time we had to decrease the strength of the bet in that market and focus on other areas. When we spotted the opening and the confidence that that opening was occurring increased, we increased our bet in that area. And when we dialed up this bet, the team we asked to work on this problem discovered there were new technologies, new partnerships, and new possibilities in Germany. And through a process of exploration and iteration, which involved discovering a range of further legal obstacles that we needed to overcome, the team developed a solution that would enable people to get their prescriptions signed, sent, and dispatched from a local pharmacy, not in 3 days, but in 3 hours, with smart notifications about what was happening along the journey. This is pretty basic stuff in a world of Deliveroo, but it's pretty revolutionary in the context of healthcare. Reducing the time to treatment, reducing suffering, increasing the value proposition for our customers. And with the removal of the prohibition of video consultations, we spotted an opportunity to launch our first native app, allowing people to select and speak to a doctor from anywhere. It was nationwide, integrated with the statutory insurance system in Germany, in other words, free to patients, wonderfully simple, secure, safe, private, and compliant. In sum, a much faster, easier way for people to get in touch with a doctor. So, to To recap, collaboration enables your teams to sense and respond to changing environments. Think about making long-term bets on value creation based on your customer insights. Scan regularly for your opportunities and increase and decrease the strength of your bet depending on what you discover. Really great to speak to you all today. Thank you very much for your time, and I really look forward to your questions.
Great work. Sorry, I've got my dog bothering me here. Thank you, Joe. Great presentation. Some takeaways from me before we head into our Q&A, I guess, is that setting up a close collaboration with your experts and industry stakeholders, I think that's a huge tip. At our company, we have Visa and MasterCard as regulatory, I guess, stakeholders, and being close to them is very, very useful. Keeps us ahead of the game often. And your concept of regulatory opportunity, I must admit, I often think of regulation as like a limitation or a set of limitations for me. So changing the mindset to say, hey, we're going to continually have conversations over time, measure the likelihood, measure the impact. I think that's a great approach, and I'll try to adopt that in future. So I guess this is over to Sean for the Q&A section.
Brilliant. Thank you so much to all of our speakers, Andrew, and to Andrew for curating. What a fantastic couple of talks. So Q&A time. Thank you to those who've submitted questions already. Just to remind you, please just log into YouTube, submit a question for our speakers, and we'll answer it now. So first question from Ada Shum. Do you think building product strategy is an art or a science? From the talk tonight, it sounds more like art than science. Would you agree?
Art versus science. Art versus science. Okay. I guess we can probably hand this over to Pavan first. I think.
Yeah, sure.
From the
I don't know. I guess one thing I didn't say is my background. I did a joint degree in computer science and philosophy, which are two wildly different disciplines, and people often are like, how do those go together? I think my answer to that is that art is quite scientific. Like, if you think about creative ways of coming up with things and you're like, oh, I need some kind of source of inspiration, or how do I get this kind of creative flair? Creativity is quite an analytical thing. Like, there's a process to doing it, and it's just by kind of practicing and kind of deconstructing things which you see as creative work and taking bits of it which you like. So yeah, product strategy, is it an art or a science? I think it's a science, but I think all art is sort of a science. So maybe that's a cop-out answer, but yeah.
A little bit of a cop-out answer, but that's okay. Comments from the others?
I think it's the same for product manager, really. Product management is an intersection type science type discipline, right? That's in part why I'm in product management. I couldn't decide what to study at university. I couldn't decide what job I wanted because I wanted to do everything. And I think strategy is that, right? It just stretches different muscles, but it takes advantage of your creativity. It takes advantage of your like really structured side. And if you find like one of those is not really exercise, you can pair up with another PM that is strong in other areas where you kind of don't have as much experience. But yeah, I think it's both.
Yeah, I totally agree. Also, agree with all those comments, and just say there's a really fantastic section on this precise problem in Ken Kosienda's book on the Apple design process, where he talks a lot about how Steve Jobs, part of his magic was bringing together the sciences and the engineering with the liberal arts. It's a great read. I can't give you any quotes off the top of my head from there, but a great follow-up read for whoever asked that question.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, another one. This is specifically directed at Susanna, but if anybody else does have thoughts, please dive in as well. So this is from João Cravero. Question for Susanna: how well do you think the state of product process scales with company size?
Well, I love that that's from Kravi, because he used to work at Onfido. So I think he's asking, what happened after I left? Yeah, so how well does it scale? So the way that we made it scale was by no longer having every single product manager do a state of product, and actually combining it into individual lines of business. So we verified the authenticity of government issued documents. we verify that those documents belong to someone, etc. So we have like 4 PMs more or less per line of business, and all of those collaborate to create a single state of product for that line of business, and they look at it together rather than the person that's looking at extraction and fraud, etc. So it does scale. I think now we're evolving a little bit more to a top-down type of approach. So very much bottom-up was the first thing we needed to do because there was nothing. And now we're getting our execs and our senior leadership do a little bit more of what you saw in the Melissa Perri type approach of where they're setting strategic intents at the company level. So it will evolve, but it has that flexibility, I think.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. A couple of other questions that have come into me. So a topical one that was kind of mentioned by a few of you. COVID-19 has changed the way we can gain resourcing funding. And often we're faced with fewer resources in general. Where does strategy fit in when you're just fighting to survive? Andrew, do you want to start with that one?
I can try. I can definitely try. So I guess as we've spoken about today, we just have to think about the purpose of our company and the why. In product, you focus a lot on delivery and execution, as I said, but focusing on the why and the broader direction of travel, as Susanna puts it, is probably the most important thing. So yes, if you've got fewer resources, as long as you're aligning with the company objectives of the why, then I think it's not as much of an issue. I think it does come an issue as when let's say you've got stretch goals, or you had a particular initiative that's dependent on adoption of users or future users, but it's not quite at the maturity of a more established product within your product portfolio. And with those, yeah, I think we have to face reality. Some of those may not continue, and other things will continue because they do deliver value. So that's my thoughts anyway. Any others to comment?
Yeah, I think from my perspective, COVID's new context, and like even if you were the best trend spotter, you would not have seen this one coming. So I think there are probably going to be a lot of strategies that are kind of based on some sort of insight or some bet about a trend that you should go back and look at the assumptions behind those bets, and you might realize that some of those are really, really way out. At least they look way out for the next 6 months. The interesting thing, though, is some of the bets that people have been making actually have just been accelerated. So look at we're having this conversation over video. From a regulatory point of view, actually, in a healthcare space, all these regulations, they just kind of got rid of pretty much all of them. So I think it's probably worth going back to your kind of overall hypothesis for your strategy and seeing which of your trends have accelerated and which of them have slowed down, which assumptions are correct and not, and then kind of rebuilding that. But I think with the new context, you kind of have to, examine your assumptions and start again.
Yeah, I would just add, I think Joe mentioned a really good thing about how strategy kind of connects your day-to-day thinking to your long-term, your vision thinking. And COVID is kind of unique in that it kind of affects both, right? Like a lot of businesses' day-to-day stuff has had to change completely, and their long-term thinking has probably had to change. So like you were saying, it's kind of, it's a chance to look at different hypotheses. I guess one thing which might be good coming out of it is that so many companies have like a lot of momentum pushing them to where they're going, and it's kind of forcing people to slow down and look at new directions, new things they can do as well.
Brilliant. Thank you. We have another question in the chat from Andre Maska. What are some common pitfalls or failures in setting an exciting product vision? And how do you deal in scenarios where people are daunted by a really ambitious product vision? Andrew, I see you smiling.
Yes. Yeah, I won't answer it yet. I might direct this over to maybe to Joe first, actually. See if he has some thoughts. Because you've transitioned off from like a CMO to like a CPO role within Zava as well. We've had a bit of a different experience with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've had quite a lot of failings with product vision, to be honest with you. So I think a few of the pitfalls from my perspective, main one is it's too far away. So I think if your product vision is like 5-10 years in the future, I know some people say it should be 5-10 years in the future. From my experience, I've found teams really struggle to grapple with that, or they kind of go off on a bit of a rabbit warren of like, you know, AI robots or whatever. And it's a little bit intangible. So I had some, I've worked with a coach called Tor Mitchell, who I'd really recommend anybody works with if they have the opportunity. And I think he recommended to me, you know, do it over a kind of roughly 18-month, 2-year-ish horizon. And that for me worked loads better. I think product visions that are, you know, I think a lot of what Pavan was saying about, you know, focusing on the customer problem and what you enable people to do, I think is absolutely critical, but it needs to be concise and precise. If it's too big and too vague, again, like what's the power and the vision? So I think the sort of specificity and power sort of go hand in hand. So yeah, I think those are probably my top two things: specific and not too far in the future.
Yeah. There's one thing I wanted to say, actually, back to a previous point Susanna made as well around product lines. So within our company, we've got different types of products split into different product lines. And it's not like you can have a single product vision that spans across everything. It's like our company does this is the vision. Each of these products have different user groups, different user needs, different problems they're trying to solve. So trying to craft like that vision statement that's individual to the product that's in the specific problem, and really honing in on the who, as Pavan says. I think that's my tips probably.
So I would just add that when you think about the length of your vision, obviously I think most of us in the room work for fairly young companies, and that's why we feel like it's too long, 5-10 years. But your vision should be as a multiplier of the age of your company. So if your company is 1 year, like maybe look at it a 2-year type of horizon, maybe maximum, you know, 1 year, maybe you don't know if you're going to run out of funding before then. But if you've been around, if you're IBM, like your vision needs to be 10 years, 20 years, like you're planning on sticking around. So there's some sort of proportionality there. I think most of us work for fairly young companies. That's why we feel like, oh, that vision is too much into the future. I don't even know where we're going to get our next round from. But it changes with the size of the company and the age. Yeah.
The other thing as well is Simon Sinek. He says something in the infinite game. Like some people get really stuck on their immediate competitors, making sure that we have the now. And the opposite argument is that if you make it too short, then you're going to miss out like the bigger picture of things, and that hill that we were talking about before. I think within our business, I think we're roughly like a 3 to 5 year type horizon, but there's a lot of stuff that we just don't know that's coming down. Like we're in the industry of payments, so payments change all the time. Hard to say.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Couple final ones from the comments. So, do you think these strategies are as applicable to B2B as they are to B2C? And kind of are any of them, would you say, particularly focused on B2B?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts before maybe passing this to Susanna for a comment. So I work in a B2B business, but the end users of that business are consumers in the end. So we have merchants that are accepting payments from people who are traveling on buses. And I think these frameworks and these tips and tools can apply to B2B, B2C, B2B2C, any kind. I think it's applicable across the board. I don't see why not.
Absolutely, and a lot of the examples I gave were B2C companies, simply because I knew that you'd recognize them and you were likely users, but that doesn't mean it doesn't apply. So when I was talking about you buying something from the groceries market, like I talked about a logistics company that could look at, okay, what happens before I actually receive the vegetables and after I've dropped them off, and looking at the ecosystem of that particular play. And the logistics company is definitely a B2B type company, and Onfido is B2B as well. You just look at the market the same way you'd look at the market for a consumer type product. It just happens that the people that are eventually buying are different, but the way you go about strategy is fairly similar. The same frameworks apply.
Actually, I've got an extension to that question, which is more directed at Pavan. So if you're working with different clients from different, like B2B, B2C, etc., has it been more or less difficult with a specific type of business when creating product visions? Like, have you found it more difficult for B2B, B2C, or is it roughly?
Yeah, so it's interesting because some of the clients my company works for and I've worked for are like huge, you know, like really big consumer name companies, and then some are like really small startups that haven't launched, and we're like working on their apps and stuff for pre-launch. So it's, yeah, I think the way we go about it is hugely different, but not in terms of like the fundamentals. So the process of kind of coming up with a strategy, coming up with a vision, like we were talking about, is all kind of similar. But I think what Susanna had a really good point about having the age of the company as a multiplier. I really love that idea of like thinking more long term with more mature companies. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. Okay, and the final question of the night comes from Chris Connor. So Chris has asked, why do we aim for top-down strategy instead of getting teams involved in bottom-up and possibly generating better results? So who has a thought on that?
Sorry, go ahead, Joe.
No, go for it.
I think I've got, that's probably based on what I was saying, you know, like this ideal of a product-led company. And to be fair, that's probably quite romanticized, you know, because we're product managers, we just want to be in charge. And we think that would be how the business is going to be more successful. I find that top-down probably generates better alignment because you have the team of the C-level group essentially not only thinking about product strategy, but also go-to-market, like what kind of salespeople do we need to hire, in which geographies, for which verticals, etc. Whereas if you go bottom-up and it's only the product team doing it, eventually you're going to have to come up at a point where your chief product officer or your head of product then needs to go and convince the rest of the C-level team, and they weren't necessarily involved, that this is the right thing to do and that they need to change their teams. So that might be a little bit more challenging, but different approaches will work for different companies at different stages of maturity. So as I mentioned, bottom up is probably something easier that you can start today yourself, like without much buy-in, you can start doing those exercises. But if you're a product leader today, like I really encourage you to put down some frameworks that you can use with your team on a top-down, because that will give like your more junior PMs a lot more comfort and more confidence that they're building the right thing and that the whole company is going in the same direction.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I think that alignment piece is absolutely critical. I think I've done this parts in the past where it's been a lot more of a bottom-up process, and I think what you end up with is a lot more diversity, but you end up also with the functions not being particularly well coordinated. And I think you know, I talked earlier about the importance of collaboration between different functions. If your functions aren't coordinating, they end up kind of pointing in different directions like that. It just ends up being a little bit chaotic. And I know, you know, some company cultures that kind of fits quite nicely. That's a trade-off. They take the extra chaos for the extra diversity. But I think it depends on what the company is really trying to do. And if the company really needs to move in a particular direction, then the importance of that alignment is heightened. But I think what I say to the question of, you know, why do we do more top down and bottom up? I think you've really got to find some meeting of the two. So I think, you know, the leaders sitting in a room, you know, whiteboarding and post-it noting, they're just so far removed from the customer context. They just don't have the time or the headspace to actually develop that. So I think it's really important that, you know, people within product teams, researchers, data scientists, everyone kind of contributes to the strategy development, whether that's through, you know, identifying a key trend, identifying a customer insight, those two parts of the organizational level need to kind of meet in the middle.
Brilliant, thanks. Andrew, Pavan, anything to add to that?
No, that's
brilliant.
great.
I think you guys wrapped up really well. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining. Thank you so much to our wonderful curator, Andrew, and to Joe, Susanna, and Pavan, our brilliant speakers tonight. Join us next month for the last Product Tank before the 1 month summer break. And have a good evening, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.